Good evening, members of the Board of Education. Thank you for the opportunity to present tonight about our NJSLA results from our spring 2019 administration and our iReady results from our fall 2020 administration. Tonight, I'll address a number of topics. You can see those listed here. Most important, I will discuss different types of assessments and then take a look at our NJSLA data from 2019 and then present just information about our fall iReady 2020 results and some areas of note that are important to highlight. When we think about the presentation and the purpose of tonight's presentation, the Department of Education requires that school districts annually report on achievement data every fall to the respective boards of education. In the absence of our spring 2020 NJSLA data, we are going to take a look at our 2019 NJSLA data, which is what the Department of Education suggested that districts do. We're also going to include an overview of our fall 2020 iReady information, which will be helpful to take a look at as well. It is important to recognize that a number of the slides will look familiar on this presentation because we've used them before as we went through our 2019 assessment report last fall. But again, I think looking at those slides in the context of our iReady data is actually a helpful thing to do and may inform some good understanding of the difference between the types of assessments that we are looking at. So NJSLA is a summative assessment. And I think it's important to recognize there are two different types of assessments, summative and formative. A summative assessment is an assessment of learning. It's something that is administered at the end of an instructional unit of time, and then you compare back against some standard or benchmark. In the sense of NJSLA, it's administered at the end of the year in May, and then it's looking at the standards for that grade level and the work that's supposed to be done across the year for a particular district. These are really high-stakes assessments usually. NJSLA is an example of a high-stakes assessment. Those are scores that are widely reported. They're used to evaluate districts. They're used to make comparisons between districts. So that becomes a summative kind of high-stakes assessment environment that actually exists as a result of the type of assessment that it is. Fall iReady is actually a formative assessment. And you'll notice a difference in the wording between assessment for learning versus a summative assessment that is an assessment of learning. And when we say it's an assessment for learning or a formative assessment, it means that we're monitoring student learning to provide feedback that can be used by instructors to improve teaching and by students to improve their learning. So when we administer something like this at the start of a school year, the goal is not to use it in a summative manner. The goal is to use it in a way that actually informs what we're doing. It can help teachers and students identify strengths, areas of challenge, and target areas that need work. When we think about our New Jersey statewide assessment review, just as background information, and all this has been shared before with the board, 2019 was the first administration of NJSLA. And we did that in math and ELA at particular grade levels. We know that we had students that took end of course assessments in algebra and geometry because those are high school courses. We know we also administered the NJSLA in science. And then there are other administrations that take place in terms of the access for ELLs and then the dynamic learning maps as well. We did not administer the 2020 NJSLA last year. We did administer the access for ELLs because it happens earlier in the year and we were able to complete that administration. When we think about the NJSLA levels, level 1 is the lowest level, level 5 is the highest level, levels 4 and 5 generally are what we look at and say that we're meeting or exceeding the grade level expectations. So just as a review of our math data from 2019, keeping in mind that students that were in grade 3 that year are currently in grade 5. Our grade 8 students have graduated and are no longer with us, as our grade 7 students are also in a different grade at this point and have moved on. So when we think about just the perspective that we have with, in general, how did our students do when we look at their overall performance in mathematics, students that were in grade 3 in the year of this assessment scored fairly high, as did a number of our students in other areas. We've made comparisons to other districts when we look at some of these data in the past. And usually our comparisons are somewhat favorable to other districts because some of this data tends to be statewide trends that we're seeing as well. Always important to keep in mind our approaching expectations, that group of students that are just a question or a few questions removed from actually meeting expectations. That is an area that we often focus on as well. When we think about just our subgroups, you can see the subgroups that are reported over here. All of these subgroups are over a certain threshold in terms of the count within the district. So it's over 20 students in each one of these. There are subgroups that are smaller than that we do not report on because, you would inadvertently actually begin to identify students by reporting on such a small group of students. You can get a sense of the different subgroups and how they perform in terms of the percentage of students at levels 4 or 5 over here as well. And you can see our level 3, which is an area that we focus on as well. ELA has the same type of data here. You can see the percentages for level 4 and 5. And then you can see the subgroup data here as well for ELA. Again, this information was reported on last year as well, so it should look familiar to people. When we think about the iReady diagnostic overview, iReady is a standards-based adaptive diagnostic assessment. It's very different than NJSLA in that sense. Conceivably, this iReady assessment is different for all the students that are taking it because depending on the answers that students are submitting, the next question varies and changes. Last year, 2019, 2020 was the first year that we used iReady. We used it only in mathematics last year. We administered twice in the fall, and then in January, we did not administer this for a variety of reasons in the spring months. So over the summer, the Return to School Committee, the instructional subcommittee met a number of times. Out of that committee's work, it was recommended that we add iReady as an ELA diagnostic as well as the math diagnostic because the platforms are very similar. Since we are already using math, it actually is something that gives us a fairly consistent way to actually administer assessments, and both staff and students could easily access that. In fall 2020, all students grades 1 through 8 took the iReady math diagnostic. All students in grades 3 through 8 took the iReady reading diagnostic. And then when we think about the winter and spring, we will be administering again to our students. So emphasizing again that iReady fall results provide information about a student's readiness to access grade level standards at the beginning of the school year. Again, that's why they're a formative assessment, because we're looking at where our students are at the beginning of the school year. What can we do to make sure that they're ready to access the standards of the type of work that will be delivered within that grade level curriculum? Reports were provided to families in mid-October. Again, those are snapshots intended to, again, give a sense of like on that particular day when we took the assessment, this was what the results were for your child. And then as we go across the year and students take the diagnostic in the winter and the spring, the shift begins to go in the winter months where we look at these both in a formative and a summative manner. And then at the end of the year, it becomes something where it becomes more summative because we compare to the grade level work and we look at where the students actually progressed across the year. So at this point in the year, we're really looking at 2 levels of iReady performance. One is needs improvement. So you'll see that in just a moment on the next slide. And this is where we know that there are certain remediation supports that are necessary. And then another group of students that are either close to grade level work, so approaching grade level work, at grade level or above grade level, which suggests that those students can access the grade level work that's being delivered by the teachers and the standards at that grade level, and something, again, that should be able to occur with the level of rigor within that grade level itself. When we think about those 2 categories, you can see here in this chart, the grade levels, you can see the number of students that are assessed, you can see the green indicating the number of students that are emerging on or above grade level placement, and the percentage of students that are actually emerging on or above grade level placement. So in mathematics, with the exception of 1 grade, we are really looking at 90% of our students or above at each grade level, just about, being able to access the grade level standards. When we think about the need for supports, we can identify fairly specifically based on the assessment results, students that are 2 grade levels below placement or 3 grade levels below placement, and specific tasks or specific suggestions for types of work that can help students actually close those gaps and actually remediate some of those areas of need. Just a special note about the math, you'll note algebra and geometry on the bottom of this chart. Those students did not take this assessment because, again, those students are actually enrolled in high school courses. When we look at iReady ELA, again, same information. We can see the number of students assessed. We can see the percentage of students that are emerging on or above grade level. Again, in language arts, we're looking at between 80 and 90% of students at each grade level. And then we can see the students, again, that are 2 or 3 grade levels below performance. I would note that in a number of these areas, we actually had identified these students already. We knew who these students were. And again, this is information that teachers can actually act upon and are resources that teachers can use to actually support those students in the types of work that they're doing to really look to close those gaps and to look at the growth that the students are making across the year, which is what that formative assessment right now sets the stage for as we move across the year. So areas of note, again, the iReady diagnostic results are intended to be formative, as I've said a number of times. We have a lot of other formative-based assessments that provide a well-rounded picture of the type of work that students are capable of doing and the type of progress that students are making. It's important not to forget about those because those are assessments that are done ongoing. These diagnostics are done at key points during the year, but all of those other assessments are assessments of work that take place across the year. The results really suggest that a high percentage of our students are prepared to meet or exceed the standards at each grade level. And it's important to recognize that we have district personnel that are working closely with iReady personnel and their data specialists to analyze and then build our own capacity to more effectively use the iReady data. When we think about just strategies that we want to be using, sustained daily independent reading continues to be something that needs to be emphasized at all levels. We know from previous years that when we administer a fall reading assessment, usually what happens is those fall scores, drop from the previous spring. And we know that's because a lot of times students are not reading as intensively over the summer months as they do during the school year. That daily independent reading, that daily engagement with reading becomes very, very important because all of these assessments that we administer tend to be reading type assessments. So we have a lot of digital tools that are available, but we also want to emphasize books in hands for students. The implementation of the Ready Classroom Mathematics program is a continued area of emphasis and professional development across the year. We did work in September on this. We did work in the October in-service days on this, and we have additional training set across the upcoming months of the school year. And then when we think about this, again, this iReady data can be arranged in report groups, so specific programs can actually access and coordinate data on students and also coordinate supports as well. And when we think about specific intervention strategies, as I mentioned before, one of the biggest interventions is having access to the data, having access to being able to use that information. So work took place in the October in-service around that. Again, thinking about the curriculum resources that are available digitally and within the program itself. Teachers have access to all the grade levels. So if I'm a grade 5 teacher, I have access to grades K through 4 and the grades 6 through 8. So I can make decisions about what types of resources I will push out to my students. Our learning paths are set up for students immediately, so students can access information that are based on the diagnostic results, access lessons that are based on the diagnostic results. And then we know that other groups can actually access those report groups and that information. And families were provided these reports in mid-October. This, again, was intended to be a snapshot of information. It should not, again, be used without considering the context of all the other types of assessments that take place across the school year as well, and the information that teachers are providing. Our assessment schedule this year, iReady will be administered in the winter and the spring. As far as the state assessment, we have really received no guidance from the state in terms of how we will be administering NJSLA when we enter into the spring months. As soon as we have actionable information, we'll actually release that to the board and communicate it to the public. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to share tonight. At this time, I'll be available to answer any questions that the board may have. Thank you so much.